Thanks, Dan. Again, my name is Jason Smith. I'm a licensed professional engineer in the state of Florida, and I work for the city of Tallahassee in our underground utilities and public infrastructure department. It's great to be here. It's great to be sharing about this exciting project, this implementation of infrastructure improvements. I see some familiar names in the participant list. It's good to be with you all again, and I look forward to meeting those of you that I've not met yet. I'm going to go through just a brief presentation to give an overview of the infrastructure improvements that are being proposed as part of our multi-purpose stormwater project. The Market District Action Plan, developed by the Tallahassee-Leon County Planning Department, based on input from area residents and business owners, was developed to create a sense of place in the district. One of the goals in the action plan is to reclaim or create new public space with a top priority of repurposing existing stormwater ponds in the center of the Market District. This is an aerial photograph of the Market District and of these stormwater ponds. Here at the bottom of the screen is the central pond, and near the top is what we call the East Stormwater Facility. Off to your left, just for reference sake, is Premier Gym. Phase 1 of the project included filling in the stormwater pond in the central area. This is now looking the opposite direction back towards the electric substation. But as can be seen in this photograph, the central pond was entirely filled in. And a portion of the east stormwater pond, the southern portion along the right-hand side of this picture, was also filled in to allow for relocation of electric transmission towers that formerly went through the middle of the project site and were moved off to the side adjacent to McClay Commerce Drive. Filling in these ponds also created more usable space for the park. To compensate for lost stormwater storage volume, the West Stormwater Facility was expanded. This is an aerial photograph of the expanded West facility, now looking back to the east with the electric substation in the middle of the screen and the east pond in the far distance. Future infrastructure improvements include retrofitting the east and west stormwater facilities and improving area roads. The west pond will be a passive park setting around a picturesque stormwater pond. This photograph is not of the west pond, but it's just an example of what it may look like. The west pond will provide water quality treatment and rate control for the project and the larger Market District. Roads around the pond for electric and drainage operation vehicles will serve a dual purpose as pedestrian paths, like the one in this photograph. The East Stormwater Facility currently has a very industrial look with steep side slopes and fences. It's actually where we coined the phrase ponds in a prison. The new East Pond will have an aesthetic amenity, with extensive landscaping and passive park elements. Again, this is just a photograph of what the pond may look like. These are just examples of what this element of the project could look like. The last photo here is an example of a constructed wetland, which is a water quality element that will likely be programmed for the far east end of the project. Until it was purchased by the city, a portion of McClay Commerce Drive was a private road and in disrepair. Adjacent business owners had to frequently patch potholes like the ones seen in this photograph. McClay Commerce Drive and McClay Road will both be improved and beautified similar to FAMU Way and Gain Street. This is a photograph of FAMU Way. The intersections of McClay Commerce Drive with both Martinhurst Road and McClay Boulevard will be improved. These improvements will enhance pedestrian safety and increase multimodal mobility in the district. Again, this is just an overview of the improvements that are planned. I look forward to meeting with and answering any questions that you may have. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Kurt Reeder of Hargraves Jones for an update on the park. Kurt?
Good. Thank you very much, Jason. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Tell me if you're seeing that. You're seeing the blue screen? Thumbs up? Perfect. Okay. Good morning. My name is Kurt Reeder, principal at Hargraves Jones, and also joining me today are my colleague and team member, Amy Linnae, and Mary Margaret Jones, president of Hargraves Jones. Our objective today is to define the Market District Park, and we'll describe where it is, how big it is, and really the most important aspect of today is asking for your guidance for what this park really should be. Blueprint has heard from interest from several different organizations about a possible place for their specific uses. And we want your input today on how that might balance with more generalized amenities and activities within the park. Our charge then really is to help determine what compatible uses and relationships are appropriate for this park. What works, how the park uses fit together, and how that works to develop a cohesive park concept. So before we launch into this presentation, I want to give you a brief sense of who we are and where we've been. We design parks and public spaces across the globe, from the 2000 Olympics in Sydney to the first large park in Moscow in the last 50 years. Many of these park sites have been intensively developed and their land uses eventually became obsolete. So in some respects, it's similar to the Market District, where it's been worked over many, many times, and it's looking for a new use as a park. We've designed all the public realm for the 2012 London Olympics, as well as a mile and a quarter of the Louisville waterfront, both now large public parks. Both of these parks are reconnecting people to their respective rivers after years of neglect and change. Our work focuses on integrating the specific site history and proposed uses with functional pedestrian and cycling connections, while also incorporating natural and man-made water features as part of a destination public park. In essence, we're aiming toward a design landscape. So as Dan and Jason indicated, we are working with Blueprint in the city to determine the programming and activities for a Market District Park rooted in community input. Our agenda today includes 6 different sections describing our process of looking at the physical site in terms of what is there today and how it came to be there. We'll look to local parks that you're familiar with and to our own portfolio to convey how we process physical and cultural and community input into a design landscape. So our first section today is the site content. Market District sits in the Tallahassee Hills, the Red Hills, a landscape of rolling hills, lakes, and sinks distinct from the coastal lowlands. You can see my cursor. This purple area indicates where the Market District is relative to Tallahassee. And you'll see recurring this purple indicator of where the project site is relative to the context. So the project site sits within a constellation of city, county, and state parks with a wide variety of amenities. It's less than a mile south of Lake Hall and Maclay State Park, about a half mile north of Timberlane Ravine Park, which is downstream from the site, and about 2 miles east of Lake Jackson, an outstanding Florida water, the final destination of the project Stormwater. Zeroing in on the Market District, the district itself is 435 acres, and it's positioned at the crossroads of Thomasville Road, the diagonal that cuts through, and then I-10 below that. The project area is shown in this diagram as the gray area labeled utility. So the project area is bracketed by residential and lake protection land uses shown in yellow, as well as by the activity center and office uses shown in red. So it's kind of the interface between residential and more commercial spaces. And the 2011 action plan is really the genesis for the Market District Park idea, as that is the document and the public process that identified these remnant pieces of public property that could and should be put to a better use as a public park. That 2011 plan covers a broad range of district-wide topics with a targeted advocacy for a park here on the east side of the Market District. Plan also anticipates future improvements of pedestrian and bike circulation upgrades. So site history. The Red Hills soils made this a highly desirable region to settle and farm. Tallahassee as a name is tightly tied to this land and synonymous with old fields. Tallahassee has been inhabited by successive waves of different cultures, native cultures stretching back more than 8,000 years. So not surprising that there are numerous historical and cultural resources spread throughout North Tallahassee, from pre and proto-historic native cultures to European exploration and settlement. And it was this initial European contact that resulted in a massive depopulation of this region due to sickness and conflict, and ultimately led to big changes in the landscape itself. The original 1824 survey shows an old Indian road crossing the tip of the project site. A much later 1984 field survey found a minor potsherd east of Maclay Boulevard, shown by the orange circle. This same 1984 field survey indicated that the project site has been so thoroughly worked over in the past that no significant finds are anticipated. It's a challenge to summarize a deep regional history briefly from a landscape history perspective. The shift from the use of enslaved persons to support the southern economy toward a succession forest gave rise to a broader economic reset with a landscape focused on quail hunting and a forest ecology worthy of conservation. Transition from fields to forest can be seen through maps and aerial photographs. Andalusia was one of the early plantations in what is now the Market District, circa 1850s. By 1883, Andalusia's owner was promoting the surrounding lands as advantageous for vineyards and views. And then by 1905, the Law family constructed the Lac Cal plantation up here by Lake Hall for quail hunting in 1905. But then by 1923, the Maclay family purchased this property and transformed it into the Calern plantation and moved away from quail and more toward display gardens. So this is an actual 1937 aerial photograph. And you'll begin to note that the tree cover is beginning to converge. So in 1954, the open and fallow fields began to give way to the forest. And you can see how the trees are slowly displacing all the lighter colored open fields. And then by 1965, the Maclay family transfers the property to the state. It becomes Maclay State Park as Calern estates are developed further to the east. And by 1966, the family sold another large portion to be used as villages, the green area in the middle here. And then by 1970, the alignment for I-10 has been determined, but not yet quite built. And when we shift to 1983, the forest canopy is almost entirely closed in between 1970 and 1980. However, you can begin to see some of the subdivision roadways that are being cut into this forest. I-10 is now more than a decade old at this point, and it begins to spur commercial development at this crossroads of Thomasville and I-10. And this is the point at which the electric substation and corridor are constructed by the city. Subdivision of residential use is nearly completed over the next 15 years, getting us up to 1999. And infill development on challenging sites continues, but the rate is dramatically decreased by the time we reach 2018. And here we are in 2020, the canopy continues to recover. It's almost grown back to its maximum extent, and development is basically in equilibrium at this point. So I'll move ahead to site analysis briefly. Overall, the project area is 30 acres with the West Stormwater facility on the left. It's a large portion of the entire site. It's just over 16 acres. So more than half of the site is given over to the West Stormwater that Jason described. The central area shown in green is 9.5 acres. And on the right-hand side, the East Stormwater facility is about 4 acres, but a good portion of that is actually water surface. So the roadway and stormwater infrastructure that Jason has described will eventually reduce some of these acreages further. Overall, the project site is 3/5 of a mile in length, and it starts out about 110 feet wide on the east side, and it gets to about 500 feet in the middle, and then closer to 800 feet wide on the west end side. So it's a bit of a wedge shape. There are numerous prominent infrastructure elements that exist out there today. The biggest one that you all have seen is the electric communications antenna. There are also high aerial transmission towers with electric lines, the ponds that Jason described. There are also a series of headwalls and control structures. Generally, the surface stormwater is collected from the east and from the south, and it moves and collected into the West Stormwater facility. Water from the residential development moves through the ravines into this area, and then it's eventually released to flow downriver toward Timberlane Road. The proposed changes to that is largely similar, with the biggest changes being the West Stormwater facility gets reconfigured from dry detention into wet detention. So that's intercepting ravine water as well as water from Hawk's Nest before releasing it to the ravine further to the south. So if we zoom out a little bit, the project site straddles two watersheds. The stormwater flows south from the west detention pond and makes a turn to the northwest toward Lake Jackson. And like Jason, I have a couple drone views that helps get you situated on where we are with the central area shown here in the middle, the substation to the top end of the page, and the east stormwater to the bottom. Sage is on the right, hidden by the trees beyond the electric lines. This drone view turns the opposite direction, and it's looking east toward Thomasville Road. Again, the central area in the middle, Maclay kind of in the middle, and then the east stormwater beyond. You'll note that the transmission towers have been pushed left and right out of this middle area. And this electric substation definitely will stay intact. It's been reconfigured now, and it will stay in this configuration going forward. So the aerial lines, electric lines move parallel to each other out of that substation west over the stormwater facility. And when you get a little bit closer to that, you can see in this photograph, it's dry detention. It's being reconfigured as wet detention by the city. And it's an interesting landscape, a sweeping topography. It has an earthen dam. It has these concrete lined swales and overhead wire. So there's a lot of complexity to this landscape in terms of its function and its regulations. This diagram begins to illustrate the current array of the electric lines that move over that west stormwater facility. And we'll talk more about the electric and stormwater constraints in a future presentation. In the end of the analysis summary, I'll stop with the tree cover diagram. This illustrates how the west stormwater facility is bracketed on three sides by existing tree canopy, and it's our aim to keep that intact. So we're going to move on to local park precedents. And we looked at 8 different area parks as representative and comparable to varying degrees to the Market District site. Maclay State Park to the north, down to Lake Alberta and Lake Anita to the south. This covers a range of city, county, and state parks that you may think, and we believe are comparable to Market District in different respects. Many of these parks are stormwater focused, and with a majority of the site allocated to ponds with a perimeter trail. We calculated the area of each, the program, and who manages each park, and listed those along the right-hand side. Just over there. And then on the lower right-hand side, we're showing a color diagram of each park overlaid with a dashed outline of what the Market District Park is to help give you a sense of scale for how these parks compare to a future Market District Park. Some of these parks integrate amphitheaters and splash pads, as well as trail circuits with the stormwater infrastructure. Others have a smaller, more naturalized stormwater pond set within larger swaths of mown lawn for events and informal play. Several of these local parks rely on perimeter trails as the primary amenity, with secondary passive seating areas and shade as a key component for personal comfort. And some of these local precedents are much larger than the Market District Park. However, a lot of that acreage is tied up in the water surface. The proportion of water to land is reversed in several of these parks. So there are more mown lawn and a smaller selection of activities, picnicking and playground set within an enveloping naturalized landscape. More recent examples, such as Lake Anita, provide a stormwater function with vegetation used to accentuate a designed habitat with ample pedestrian access and use. And then the state parks tend to be a bit more expansive with significant forest canopy, broader recreational activity options, really not possible at the Market District project area. So to summarize that, this is a scale comparison of all these parks that I rapidly moved through to show you their relative dimension, proportion of water to land, And we ask that you think about what are the positive qualities of some of these or all of these, which one might be your favorite local park, and what aspects of it could or should be used to help define the Market District Park. So we wanted to show 7 parks from our portfolio really briefly that speak to the similar scales to the Market District and to context to give you an idea of how we balance historical and cultural resources with current demands for public access and recreation. So our intent here is to show you something beyond Tallahassee that might spark an idea with you. And we'll start with South Florida. This is a park, South Point, that transformed the government cut edge into a pedestrian promenade with a simple serpentine landform that offers elevated views in all directions. And the program is tucked within the curves of the landform itself. So some areas are mown, some are dune restoration areas. In Seattle, this wastewater facility generated massive quantities of excavated soils that we configured into a new topography. So the program here was focused on restored stream ecology overlaid with a pedestrian trail network through a reforested landscape. In Nashville, Cumberland Park is comparable to the Market District in size. This project has a lot of activities in a very small footprint, and it includes environmental play, climbing opportunities, splash pad, amphitheater, and access to some existing industrial infrastructure artifacts that were left on site, and we incorporated those into the park itself. And similar to Cumberland Park, we adapted what were exclusively portlands into a passive linear city park in New Orleans. Crescent Park is more than a mile long, and it's primarily a pedestrian promenade flanked by native gardens sandwiched between a heavy rail and the Mississippi River. In Houston, we converted surface parking lots in what was the sleepy end of downtown to become an extensively programmed park. So it has underground parking, it has large event venues. It's been used for Super Bowl and Final Four celebrations, but it's also flexible, and the key is comfortable enough for daily Zumba classes, balanced with ample shade and gardens for a really informal and passive place to go to. A good precedent for the Market District Park is Carruthers Park in Portland, where it has a half-acre lawn surrounded by stormwater gardens. It's crisscrossed with boardwalks and pathways connecting to play and splash rooms nestled within that stormwater area. And lastly, we're wrapping up a master plan effort for Los Angeles on the conversion of a drinking water reservoir to a public park. And though it may at first blush seem much bigger than Market District, the land area is comparable to the project site area. And its proximity is similar in that it's adjacent to single-family residential, and the emphasis here is on site ecology and pedestrian circulation. So this summary diagram gives you an idea of the relative areas of these 7 parks that I showed you really quickly, and compares that to the Market District Park shown here in the center of the slide. So we're trying to think of ways to best approach the topic of activities and to engage you in that effort. And we've grouped a broad selection of 7 different categories to help spark your input. So that includes nature and education, social gathering and food, arts, culture and events, health and wellness, and support facilities. So let's circle back to our primary objective here. We're asking for your input on what this park should be. These are brief descriptions. Helpful here is a checklist all on one page, but it's probably helpful if we show you some examples from elsewhere to suggest possible ideas. So the next series of slides, we're juxtaposing different activities and different materials and different elements and components for you to think about. So in this case, permeable trails versus more formalized paved walks, wetlands as distinctly different from gardens rich with planting diversity that are accessible to pedestrians. Thinking about education, should this Market District Park focus more on passive interpretation through signs perhaps, or should it anticipate more formalized small groups or scheduled class visits focused on a particular narrative history, cultural history, maybe it's stormwater or electric infrastructure, something that ties this park narrative to this particular site in time. The question of support facilities and amenities. We're certainly going to have benches and lighting. The question here is much larger. What day-to-day support facilities make sense for this Market District Park? Should there be on-site administration or storage space? Should there be restrooms? Shade is going to be a key component. Should we supplement that with recharging stations? Maybe a fenced-in dog park. In terms of food and gathering, we'll certainly have tables for families and groups, but what other larger event or food-focused capability is appropriate here? Should it include a brick and mortar cafe versus a more temporary movable kiosk? Food trucks, farmers market, how permanent and how temporary should these food-focused amenities be for this site? In terms of arts and culture, we need to hear from you regarding performance venues, if any, for this site, and how best to incorporate art into the site. Should art be temporary and changing each season? Should it be permanent? And if permanent, what sort of scale and how much of it in this landscape? Relative to play and recreation, should the focus be on more traditional, more environmental climbing type play shown in the upper left-hand corner, or should it be a more conventional playground? To what extent should water play be included? Should there be small court games like bocce in the lower left? Or should we focus more on a flexible lawn space to throw a frisbee or to run around with friends versus a more dedicated space for a skate park? Those are kind of the broad range of topics, and we'd love to hear more from you on those. With regard to basic health and fitness, should we be leaning more toward an open-ended multi-use trail similar to the other area parks, or should we aim to include fixed specialized facilities for exercise and skating or cycling? If we've learned anything from this COVID era, it's just that being outside in the landscape is crucial to all of our mental health. It's okay for the Market District Park to be a passive landscape, comfortable for solitary strolling, or walking with a friend or family, or with a lot of people. We encourage you to think of the Market District Park as a destination landscape, as a place designed to accommodate a wide range of activities at different times. It may be a shady walk beneath trees, contrasting with an open lawn with intensively planted water gardens, or opportunities to simply people watch. So one final example as I close out. Discovery Green in Houston has a very heavy park amenity program. It's heavily curated. The Conservancy that runs this park conducted a recent survey that despite all of their programming options, their survey came back indicating that 70% of the visitors go to this park simply to be together, friends and family, outdoors, because it's free. It wasn't the park amenities that were driving people to go there. It's that it's a comfortable place to be. And that's what we're aiming for. So in this slide, our work is aimed squarely at providing a compelling landscape, flexible alternatives to our already over-programmed work and home environments. We want to be deliberate in developing the right mix of activities, keeping the park adaptable through time without trying to be everything to all potential visitors on day one. So with that summary, Blueprint has activated an online survey on the city website shown here at TallahasseeMarketDistrict.com. And this is the entire survey right here. It's 14 questions that invite you to select from multiple choice options. About half the questions will ask about you, and the other half ask about your guidance for this park property. In instances where you may not see your singular topic of interest, there is a space where you can respond with other feedback. We want to emphasize that in this remote environment, as Dan said before, there are multiple avenues for you to contact the project team. Today, we're going to have a live Q&A with the team immediately after this. We also have an online survey that I have given you the address for. And then beyond that, the city website provides both phone and email contact information for you to reach out directly to city and Blueprint team members.